Hi, this is Andrew Mitchell, Director of Photography for American Horror Story Double Feature, and this is the Go Creative Show.
Hello and welcome to the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers. My name is Ben Consoli, and today we speak with Andrew Mitchell, Director of Photography for American Horror Story Double Feature. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me.
I am so excited to talk to you about this show. I am such a huge fan of the American Horror, really all of it. American Crime Story, American Horror Story. I just love the entire catalog of work in that whole production company. It's just so great. And I can't wait to talk to you about it because this season is unique and awesome. And there's so much to discuss. But before we get there, I want to quickly mention our sponsor for today's episode, MZ Empowering Filmmakers. And of course, remind you all to follow us on your favorite podcast app, as well as Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. All things Go Creative Show at gocreativeshow.com. So, Andrew, once again, welcome to the show. We've been covering American Horror Stories and American Crime Stories for years now. This franchise just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and better. Have you been involved in this franchise for a while, or is this kind of new for you?
The American Horror Story franchise, this is a new thing for me. I did several days when Ryan Murphy wanted to do some music. He brought me in because he knew me from Glee as a camera operator. But this is my first big step into that world. I've done the American Crime Stories series and have been with Ryan Murphy TV since 2008. So I'm connected to it, but this show, not so much this one.
It must, now from just a very outside perspective, as just a viewer and somebody that enjoys the Ryan Murphy universe, it does seem like you guys are a really tight-knit family and you tend to use the same people, you use the same actors, same crew. It seems like kind of a unique way of running a production company. Is that the case? Or is this kind of the way all production companies run, but it just doesn't have that same branding?
Oh, I would say you hit it on the head there. Ryan Murphy is very loyal to those that have been with him and stayed with him and produced good work. So he's definitely been loyal to me in terms of bringing me on. In fact, he would used to shift us from all of his starting pilots, my crew, and so that was a privilege. And we spoke a while back, and I shared an interest in doing more DP work. And, so he made that happen through Ratchet and a little bit of Hollywood and then this show.
Now, I want to talk about that specifically because, like you just said, I was looking at your IMDb and I see, over 50 credits in the camera department. But as a director of photography, you were mentioning before the show, American Horror Story Double Feature is your first time DPing an entire series. So that, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
And I'd love to talk to you about that journey. How did you kind of make that jump?
Well, I've been in television, mostly television, for a very long time. A few features here and there, but I probably have, you mentioned 50 credits, but those include like TV series that have 121 episodes. And probably close to 500 episodes of TV, hour-long episodes of TV, and got into this position of being a camera Steadicam and making things happen in that world. Very privileged to get the opportunities that I've had. Done some great projects. Been recognized for some of those. And so, at a certain point, though, you wear the Steadicam rig long enough. And anyway, I just went to Ryan and said, "Hey, is there room for advancement here? I'm getting up there in age, and not that there's people out there that can run the Steadicam at all ages, but I've kind of made the decision like, hey, maybe let's transition to director of photography, give me some more creative opportunities, some new challenges." And I went to him and proposed it, and he was open to it, and he made it happen.
Now, is that typical? Like, is this a traditional, typical story for DPs to have come up through camera operation?
Yeah, I think so. Typically you would have, on a show at least a television show, you would break off your A camera operator to become your second unit DP sometimes, or sometimes it's the C camera operator that the DP has brought in specifically to break off and do second units. So I don't think that is such an odd idea to have an operator that transitions. In the Ryan Murphy world, it was definitely a loyalty thing, from
Mm.
him, that he wanted to um, pay me back for many years of service in his world.
I love hearing that. I mean, it just seems like such a great guy to work for, and I don't know. It like warms my heart to know that that kind of loyalty still exists in the production world. That makes me very happy. Now, you did say that you got a couple of opportunities with individual episodes. Like you said, you got an opportunity in Ratchet to do one episode as a DP, but
Yeah,
this is your first full series. And what a series to begin with, because it's really two. It's
yeah.
two totally different stories. And as it's named, American Horror Story Double Feature, it's because there's two different stories going on that I'm hearing align eventually in the end. And we just cannot wait to find out how those things align. But talk to me about that, the difference now as a director of photography going into your first series. What are some of the big differences that you now, experienced, or things that you have to deal with that you didn't have to as a camera operator?
Well, the biggest thing for me is there's so much prep work and off the clock time that you spend. As an operator, you can read the story, you can prep ideas for that and so forth, but most of that happens on set. While you're creating shots or delivering shots. But as a DP, you're thinking weeks in advance for equipment. You're thinking stylistically, what you need, filtration. You're figuring out locations. You're figuring out just so many of the details, um, which which I kind of had an idea about, but I didn't know how huge that was. There's at the end of the day, there's a whole thing about what's next, what's tomorrow, what's the next day, what's next week. Um, so in terms of like your thought pattern, it's the DP's mind. I think is just exploding with information and giving information, taking information, processing all of that. Whereas an operator, you show up, you make some cool stuff, and then you go home and you don't think about it.
It also seems like from that description that a camera operator can be maybe more in the moment because you're not worried about the next episode so much. Did you find that to be the case?
Oh yeah, yeah. You can definitely
Mm.
be in the moment as an operator, and your focus is different, right? With the DP, it's like you're doing one thing, and then somebody from production design comes and asks about a set for next week, or or you get a call from dailies or something, or something didn't color right, so you're dealing with that during the day. So there's a lot of distractions, um, and you can compartmentalize that. You can put that into lunch, you can put that before work or after work, but there's definitely the operator can live in the moment. Um, but I like to
Was there
I do that as well as a DP. I can compartmentalize and push that off. Push that exterior questions and
Well,
so
that
forth.
seems like a skill you need to have. If you have all these people and all these department heads gnawing for your attention while you're doing something else, I mean, you have to be able to balance that. Um, it, well, I guess how do you? I mean, now the more I think about it, it's like, yeah, I do a ton of commercial work, and there's oftentimes it's 1 or 2 days. It's not anything that lasts for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. So, um, how do you balance being able to focus in the moment and make sure that the task of the day is getting done, but also answering questions about tomorrow or the week after?
At the beginning of the day when you're starting out, it's you're living in the moment. You're figuring out what the current setup, the current scene, the timing, the actors availability throughout the day. You're making a plan. But then there are going to be moments where you get into a lighting setup and you've given out your assignments or whatever, and then you can be like, okay, I can break for 10 minutes and think about the equipment we need for next week's shoot in Lancaster.
Yeah.
So you can kind of divvy it up. And then at the same time, people will come up to me with questions, and I'm like, not now. Sorry, come back to me later. Um, just
Was
to,
there something that you missed when, being the director of photography for this series and just coming off of just basically a whole career of operating, was there something you missed about operating?
oh yeah.
Like what?
I love operating. I love to move the camera. I love to feel the motion of the camera connecting with the scene. And I had my A camera dolly grip on the show, Corey Corona, working with our A camera operators, and because we had a few, and so there was actually an opportunity. We were shooting the alien ship crash, and President Eisenhower is inspecting it, and it was like a COVID shutdown day.
Mm.
So we get there. It's out in Lancaster. It's hot. We have techno crane. We have all this alien stuff spread across the field, and all of a sudden the COVID team starts pulling out people. It's like, oh, this operator contact tracing, and then
Oh
this
no.
operator contact tracing, this first assistant contact tracing, this operator. So we have 3 cameras. So all 3 of my operators got pulled. 2 of my first assistants got pulled. We got our digital utility got pulled. Our um, I think our loader got pulled. Anyway, we were left with like 5
Wow.
people. So I got to jump on the techno crane, and I had a fantastic day. I love the techno crane, and so we had an awesome day. My usual first assistant, Penny Sprague, got bumped up. This is all we're calling into to our local, and like, hey, this is happening. We need to bump up people, and they're like, okay, go ahead. So anyway, we finished out the day, and everybody kind of moved to different positions, but I got to get back on the camera, which I really love.
Is COVID exposure like the new way of career advancement? Is it like basically, actually, the DP has COVID exposure. I'm going to need to take over for you today.
Yeah, exactly right. I'll tell you what, it really helped a lot of people's careers.
I can imagine.
At
I
least
can
on
imagine.
our show, because people would get pulled, and then it's like, okay, union says you can bump up to, our camera PA, you can bump up to digital loader, which is like, okay, there's 1 out of 30 days. So
Jesus, well, there's a silver lining, I guess.
yeah, there is a silver lining for sure.
So you love operating. You've done it for your whole career. How do you, or there must have been moments where you're watching a scene and you're thinking to yourself like, oh, I just want to get behind the camera and just do it, because sometimes it's harder to explain what you want than it is just to do it. And did you ever have those moments?
You could ask my operators, but yes. Yeah, I love being behind the camera. I'm very specific about what I like. Um, we're all on radio. We don't do the comm system, but we do radios, and so I would try to give notes between takes, occasionally during a take, which I know as an operator we all hate. Um, but yeah, I have that feeling just because of um, having done it for so long. I know exactly what I would like. So, and the operators were patient with me in terms of my notes and so forth. I think we got into a groove there. But yeah, I miss being behind the camera.
Well, I imagine that being an operator will only make you a better DP. I mean, it seems like those skills are really valuable. Do you feel that that's the case?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think here's the deal with that. It's like, as an operator, if you like, it's always great to wear somebody else's shoes. You know, it's like, if you can be an operator and DP a day, then you kind of get it, why your DP acts and does things a certain way.
Yeah.
Um, and if you could be a director for a day, then you'd know, oh, why is the director like rushing us on this or that? So wearing somebody else's shoes really is eye opening, in terms of what they're dealing with, and knowing, like, because as an operator, I'd be like, oh man, why won't he just move that light? Because I'd really like to make my frame here, whatever. And then you become a DP, and you're like, that's the only place the light can go. There's no other place.
Mm. Mm.
Or you have an actress who's very specific about her lighting, and it's just like, no, this is how it is. Tighten the frame. So I don't know if I answered that question about.
You answered a question. I don't even remember what
Yeah.
the question was, so we're fine.
Okay.
um, now I forgot. Oh, I know what I wanted to ask you is we're talking to a lot of like young and new filmmakers that are just kind of coming up in the ranks, as well as some pros out there as well. And we're all kind of learning from each other's experience. That's the point of the show. What do you think are the skills that a director of photography really needs to have, really needs to hone to be their best? And asking you this question at this time in your career is really interesting because you
Yeah.
just made that jump, and I'm sure you must have learned a lot in this process.
Yeah. So before the series, I connected with several mentors, and I asked them the same question. So reviewing back, they said, be yourself. So do what you think you should do. Like, don't try to copy anybody. They said, make your day. So finish the work at hand, which sometimes means compromising, you know. They said, good attitude, positivity, is super helpful. I should pull those notes out. But in terms of what I've learned, I mean, those are all great things, and in terms of being a first time DP, I'm trying to think back, like what, for up and coming DPs, myself
Well, I
included.
can imagine, and correct me if it's wrong, but I can imagine that communication has got to be so much more difficult simply because in order, like we were mentioning before, because you've been able to just do it for so long, now being able to articulate what it is that you want someone else to do and hope that they give you what you're asking for has got to be hard. That just being able to explain something like that is tough to do. I mean, that's what I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not very good with my words, but I'm good with visuals. So, and sound effects. You can ask my people about that. I'll make sound effects to describe shots.
Like what? Now you got to give us one. You got to
just
give
like,
us one.
the camera's going to go, and it's going to, it's going to look at the end. Or, you're going to go, boom. So, and they get it.
You need
They
a little
speak my
Foley machine
language.
on set.
Yeah, exactly. I do. But communication, yeah, that can be, that's key, and a lot of times it's just like, let's get an Artemis phone out, or let's get a Finder out. And let's look through the visuals. My descriptions of things don't always line up. Me and my gaffer, I had to choose my words wisely, which I often didn't, where I'd be like, let's make that light hotter. And it would be like, I'm thinking brighter and he's thinking warmer, like, oh, let's go 3000 Kelvin instead of 32, And so you have to pick your words specifically. So communication is actually a huge, huge, huge characteristic for explaining things clearly, which makes it more efficient,
Absolutely. Let's dive into the series. I want to talk about, how it
Sure.
looks, the decisions you made, cameras, lenses, all of it. So let's begin, first of all, with an explanation to the audience that, may or may not have seen the show. We had mentioned earlier, it is two different stories kind of put together. It is truly a double feature. I think the first one is 6 episodes and takes place in Provincetown, Massachusetts. And the other one is 4 episodes that takes place in Albuquerque, New Mexico, right?
Yeah.
Or I guess partially.
Yeah.
But
somewhere in the desert.
Exactly, in the desert. But there's 2 different stories going on, 3 completely different looks, because in part 2, there's kind of present day and the past.
Yep.
But let's start with the first part, which is the Provincetown part. Part 1 is called Red Tide, I believe.
Yeah.
And the first thing you notice from the very first frame is this is completely devoid of color. It's not black and white, but it is drained of all of its color, except for a couple instances that we'll talk about.
Mm-hmm.
But that look was just so striking and so interesting and so cold and scary in its own way. Talk to me about the color palette of part 1 and how you got there.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you mentioned cold, because when Ryan Murphy pitched the concept, He wanted the colors to be cold, gray, and pewter. So
Hmm.
we took that, um, and we went with obviously a desaturated look. Um, we went towards the blues and grays. Our production designer, Chloe Arbiter, came up with some, production layouts and photos and things of our sets with that color palette attached. We had executive producer John Gray guiding us through and approving, colors and such for woods and paints and so forth. And so that's just kind of what we went with. And I got with our final colorist, Jeremy Sawyer at Light Iron, and we created a LUT that kind of fit that pattern. We
Hmm.
did a couple of tests, and adjusted that LUT for the show. So um, we had essentially one LUT to rule them all for the first half. And it has a little bit of contrast to it. It has some dark blacks to it. It Anyway, that was the idea of this whole desaturated look, except for the color red. So the
Yes.
color red was supposed to be vibrant. It was supposed to stick out, and within that whole world of this desaturated cold look, each of the locations which I pitched originally should have their own look within that same world. So the Gardner house is the most neutral of all the sets. That's like the home base neutrality, um, cold whites, that kind of thing. And then you could move on to the Muse restaurant, which has a little bit of red, some little red candles when they perform the songs. That's under a red light. Um, and the Muse, which is also the name of the pill in the show, has that red motif. Um, our warmest set would have been Belle's, which is one of the kind of the pill pushers, and she's got candlelight, and so that was almost the warmest we could get, but still has somewhat of a desaturated look. Um, like Mickey Shack, which I enjoyed them as was one of my favorite sets, which was a tiny little set. Um, I For some reason I kept calling that dark chocolate. For some reason, that was the look.
Why?
I don't know. It just felt like there were these dark browns in it, and the color was, the color coming in the window was cool. Yet he had some warmer lights inside. So essentially, in our lighting design, it was um, interior lights, tungsten lights, which are anywhere from like 2400 Kelvin to like 2800 Kelvin. Those lights were supposed to be just warm of neutral. So if you shot at 3200 Kelvin, those lights are going to look very warm. So we shot the entire series at, well, interior 3000 Kelvin, so that it brought that in a little bit. Some of the tungsten lights we would gel. We would add a little blue to them to bring them closer to that palette. So I would say our palette was, somewhere in between, like, in final, it's probably somewhere in between like 2800 Kelvin and 3500 Kelvin is our cool side,
Hmm.
right? So the idea was interior lights are just warm of neutral. Um, Daylight is just cool of neutral, and even night was just a touch cooler than day. So that
Hmm.
the color palette was just like squash, like I don't, my screen's not that big, but if this is a full color palette, we try to squeeze it into a tighter range of like Kelvin temperatures and so forth.
Yeah.
So anyway, and then I pushed for, like, when they were at the grocery store, I was pushing to go like this like pukey green kind of look, to have a look. One of the things is, when I talk with our colorists, I'm like, if we're going to do a look, let's not go halfway.
Hmm.
Like, let's make it look like a look, and not like, oh, that day was like cloudy and there was no color. Like,
Sure.
let's make it stick. And so I was pushing that for the grocery store, but post production didn't like it that green. So we pulled back. They gave me a little bit, but they pulled back on that, which is fine. Um, and then when we shot Ursula, who comes from California, when we shot California, that was full color. And then when she came to Provincetown, she still remained colorful. If you watch, she has a little bit more color than everybody else. So um, that was
Now,
just our nod.
what
Yep.
does that limited, like your little graph here, what does that limited color temperature do for skin tones when you still need to make people look good? I mean, it
Yeah.
is American Horror Story.
Yeah.
Um,
So
there's even kind of like a sexiness in the evil in that show. There's
yeah,
just something, they've got good looking people. You want them to look good.
yeah.
How do you balance that?
That was super tricky. Because okay, so here's the deal: is like uh, Finn Whitrock has a natural pinkish tone to his face. Um, Lily Rabe has a very fair porcelain kind of looking face, right?
Mm, mm,
Um, Leslie is a warmer, tanner feel. Our young girl was like almost beach tan. And so having all of these different facial tones and then putting them in the same scene, it, and then putting our LUT on there made it like, why does everybody look so different, right?
mm,
So we had to play with that a little bit, and they adjusted makeup just a touch, um, but that was tricky because when you're putting a LUT on certain colors, and bringing down reds or crushing certain colors, and actually it became a little bit of an issue, but um, we took care of it in final color. Anything that was like grossly out, but a lot of it was just pulling down. Since we wanted the reds to pop, we had a little push on the red, which made it difficult to bring Finn's more warmer tones in his skin down. So
mm.
we had to adjust that later, because of that LUT. We had to pull that back on his scenes or just window his face, kind of a deal. So I mean, honestly, that's a really good question because that was a major concern, and we can color balance a little bit with our lights to adjust. We did a little bit of that as well.
There's always going to be finish work, but it seems like, I'm talking to DPs almost every week for the show. It seems like there's this trend in trying to make the look in camera as real as possible. It seems like people are almost pushing away from the reliance on post so much because they want more accuracy on set. And, I always kind of have that in the back of my mind when I'm talking to people like you is like, how much does it look like the final video while you're on set?
Um, we try to get as close as we can.
Yeah.
Here's the deal with Ryan Murphy TV is, at least in my experience, the cut that he watches is a dailies cut. So
Really?
our dailies have to be as close as possible because he
Wow.
doesn't watch it.
Okay.
He watches the dailies cut. There's no like, oh, let's edit it and throw it to color and then show him. He'll watch the dailies cut. So we
Wow.
have to be spot on. And so when I was working with our dailies colorists, I think we had 4. I was very specific, and they're like, "Yeah, but you can take care of that in final." And I'm like, "Our boss watches this before final. We have to get as close as possible." So I would say there was a huge effort on set to make it, you know, proper a final look, but then obviously there's some color at the end.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm always thinking of that skin tone, set design. Because when you have a wide spectrum of color in your look, I mean, which you've seen in Hollywood. Actually, a lot of Ryan Murphy stuff is super colorful, and you can
Yeah.
you can really allow everything in there. But when you narrow anything that's colorful really pops out. Like it really sticks out like a sore thumb if the color isn't spot on. So I imagine that was a bit of a challenge for you. And also, you are creating kind of a lot of people that don't experience all 4 seasons or that even really know the Northeast except for the summertime. You don't realize that the beach communities up here in the Northeast, I'm in Boston,
Mm.
are bleak during the winter. Like it's a totally, totally different vibe during the winter than it is during the summer. Have you had experience up in the Northeast during the winter in these beach communities prior to really understand?
I'm trying to think about that. So I was raised in Maryland, but that's not
Hmm.
Northeast. Um, have I been up there? I'd been to Boston in the winter before, but not really a beach community.
Well, I think you
We
nailed it.
referenced. Thank you. We referenced photos and things like that. Our exec producer John Gray, loaned me a book of I think it was Provincetown photos, in the winter and so forth to kind of match up. And then we made that look, and it's kind of bleak. We shot in February, and February was rather bleak. We had some chilly days, and then we had some sunny days. So I mean,
Mm.
honestly, I was praying for clouds because that was our look, you know. So we had fogged in days that had to cut with sunshine. So that was also a trick. Um,
Did you do any on-set work there? Like, was the house a built set, or were you in Provincetown the whole time?
um, oh yeah, in terms of the sets,
Yeah.
The Gardner House was on stage at Fox.
Uh,
Belle's was on stage at Fox. The Muse restaurant was on stage at Fox. Mickey's, pretty much all of the interiors
all the interiors. So your
we built.
exteriors were actually in Provincetown.
Yeah, the exteriors were in Provincetown, and so that that brought up some tricks later. But yeah, and what a city to shoot. It's amazing. You know, it's beautiful. Some of the drone shots Cine Drones got us were amazing, and you know, I thought we did a nice little promo for P Town for sure.
Let's take a quick moment and talk about MZ empowering filmmakers. Now, MZ is basically the Netflix of filmmaking education. And when you go to MZ, you are faced with hundreds of hours of high quality video based filmmaking education that covers all the things we need to know about here, like directing, cinematography, post production, visual storytelling, and more. And of course, there's two components to it. You've got great courses and great instructors. So first of all, courses. One of their more recent ones, Indie Film Blueprint. It's a roadmap for how to plan, shoot, and sell your first indie feature, right? And in addition to that, you've got advanced editing with DaVinci Resolve. You have the art and technique of film editing with Tom Cross, who edited La La Land and No Time to Die. And then you have the educators. I mentioned Tom Cross. They also have Vincent LaForêt, Shane Hurlbut, Philip Bloom, and so many more. It truly is the premier place to learn about filmmaking. Now, you get 20% off of your purchase by simply using GCS20 as your promo code. And you can buy individual courses or become an MZ Pro member, which gives you access to all of it, which is that Netflix model like we talked about earlier. So I strongly encourage, check it out, gocreativeshow.com/MZ, MZED, empowering filmmakers. Sarah Paulson she's in like everything. So
Yeah.
she's in both parts of this double feature. She's in impeachment. I imagine it's all happening at the same time. Scheduling must have been a challenge for you guys.
Yeah. um, yeah, scheduling was like our poor production team trying to get everybody working at the same speed. So we had impeachment rolling next to us on a stage at Fox, and then we were on another stage. But Sarah Paulson had the lead in impeachment, and so we had to borrow her from time to time, and it was like one day every 2 or 3 weeks.
Mm,
And so, as part of that, we had to shoot scenes without her. She could not travel to Provincetown to shoot any of the scenes there. And, to the credit of the production team, when Ryan Murphy saw our cut, he's like, "How did you do this?"
really?
Like
Oh, that must have made you feel so good.
oh, I felt right. He's like, "How did you shoot this? Sarah never went to P Town. Like, how did you do that?" And so, it credits them in terms of making this whole thing work. So there's a scene where, Sarah comes out of the house and she's not going to take the pill. They've just broken into the house, and so she comes out of the house, which is a double, and in P Town, and she walks down the street, and that's a double in the wide shot, and then we did a close up on stage, like in a stage with just a green screen behind her, and we're pulling her a Steadicam with her face, and then we did another shot in Ventura where we're outside, where we put tree branches over a low angle of her walking up as well. And then we cut to these wide shots of the double again, like getting pushed up against this house in the location. And then we cut into a set that Chloe built in Ventura County outside, where she gets pushed up against the doorway. And then we shoot all this coverage in this fake set, which cuts to other shots of Macaulay Culkin, who's walking in from the real location. Anyway, it was this whole mix of like 3 different locations, some on set, some in P Town, and so forth. And really, everybody did a great job in terms of like matching, colors and smoke and so forth. And then we did the same thing when her and Macaulay are watching the Gardner house, and they come out, and then they walk around the house and then break in. Macaulay's footage is all in P-Town, and all of Sarah's footage is on stage at Fox. So
Amazing.
it's you know, I guess we pulled it off. I hope so.
You'd never know.
I hope so.
I love that. I mean, that's some real old school movie magic. I love that stuff.
I guess so. Yeah.
There's a couple additional things. Oh no, go ahead. Go.
Yeah, no, but in terms of scheduling, it was a big thing. Sarah had her show Impeachment. Lily had a feature in the middle of the show that she left to do. So it was on and off. Evan Peters was in Monster, so he was not available for some of the stuff. So that was a major scheduling nightmare for production.
Oh my God. Well, there's two other things I want to discuss in the part one of American Horror Story double feature. I see here your favorite fire gag, and I want to know what that is. That's something that you had brought to us in prep, and I'm like, all right, I need to know what this is now. So can you tell the audience what your favorite fire gag is?
Okay, so I ran across this idea on talking through gaffers and stuff like that. But, I've seen as an assistant way back when, fire gags were like two babies or two tweenies and guys like doing this with the dimmers, hand dimmers and whatever. Like sometimes they'd be a little bit of gel or different colored gels. So with our LED technology now, we took 3 Helios tubes, right? And Helios tubes you can divide them into 8 different pixels, I'll say, right? 8 different sections. And so I had heard of this idea where you could run a video feed through the dimmer board and translate that into essentially a 24 pixel TV, right? And so you're running a video feed of fire through 24 pixels, right? And so it's not, it's like less than video game pixels in the 80s.
Yeah.
But what that gave us was essentially you saw the video of fire appearing on Helios tubes. So the bottom tube was fairly static. It had a little bit of variation. And then the middle tube had a little bit more. And then the top tube would just pop here and there because the tips of the flames would just barely hit. And so we played with that. And so Johan was our dimmer board op. And so he put this program together. We talked about it like weeks in advance. I'm like, hey, can you try this? Blah, blah, blah. And we tested out different fire video feeds and different, because he could speed up the video or he could slow it down. And so anyway, that's what we ended up with. And I thought it had a very real look because it wasn't.
That's so crazy. So you're running video through, am I understanding that right? You're running video through the Helios tubes?
Yeah.
That's not, I've never heard of that.
That's
Is that
nuts,
a common use for this?
I don't know, but I loved it.
So this is just that. That's crazy. Okay, so
it's a natural fire pattern.
Wow. So you're combining 3 Helios tubes, and that's basically your screen.
Yeah.
And running a video of fire through it. And that's what you mean by the lower pixel resolution because there's only so many pixels represented in the 3 tubes.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Wow, what a cool idea.
I loved it. And, occasionally we would put 2 of these little fire gags together, so I thought it came out pretty well. I mean, it's a show, but
that's really cool. Oh, I love that.
Because
I'm going to look more into that.
Fire was supposed to play a bigger role in the storyline, and it kind of faded a little bit. So anyway, I was super stoked with that, and Gaffer, David Kagan and Johan putting that together. So
now you got a big scene with Belle's massacre, and I'm hearing that it's 96 frames per second. It took quite a while to get the sequence done. Talk to us about that and why you chose 96 frames. What did that do for the scene?
So originally it was pitched to do like a big Warner style fight scene where we go from, you have your character. So it was going to be in Harry's POV, Finn Whitrock's POV. And he's the protector of his child and fighting for his baby. And so originally it was going to be that. And we did 96 frames so that they could speed ramp, essentially. So
Mm.
you could have a slow motion punch and then a fast motion, whatever, blood spurt or whatever. And so we shot the whole thing 96 frames. And as you know, Belle's is a rather dark set,
Mm.
lit primarily by candlelight. There's a giant candelabra that hangs over it, and it's actually based on a real location in Provincetown. And so, in terms of candlelight and ASA, we didn't have a whole lot of room for adding 2 stops of light. So what we ended up doing
Yeah.
there is, and the other thing is we had to shoot the sequence like fast. Evan wasn't available, and he's one of the major characters in the series. And then we had all these stunt players coming in, and so anyway, we built this. Chris Garlington built this rig that ran pipes over the whole like main area, and we hung a bunch of light matte 4s up there. Some were down lights, some were cross lights, and tons of baffles. The key grip and gaffer know that I love baffles, so almost all the time my lights have snoots and baffles in them, and sometimes there'll be a baffle, like the baffle on edge has diffusion. This one doesn't have diffusion, so I'm a little bit arts and craftsy that way. And anyway, so then we just started shooting the sequence, and it was just like calling into Johan, hey, Johan, take, this L4 down, take that one up, warm that one up, cool that one. And it's just like, as soon as the cameras were in position, it was like ready to go.
Yeah.
And so the 96 frames was mostly, it was to do the speed ramps, but to accommodate that, we had to light that thing like it was on
Exactly.
fire.
You
Like-
needed a lot more lighting in a scene
Yeah.
that's supposed to be dark.
Exactly. So if you went onto that set, you'd be like, this is not Belle's. This doesn't look like that. And then you would go back to the video monitor and you'd be like, oh yeah, it's the same. So,
Yes.
give,
What did
give,
you
or,
shoot
give
on?
or take. We had to light a big space without getting too bright. So,
Exactly. I want to talk about the camera and lens package for American Horror Story double feature. What did you end up choosing, and why?
So we went with Panavision. I have a loyalty to Panavision, and David Dotson there set us up. So I chose the Sony Venice, which I really fell in love with on Hollywood, and I just believe it has a really good look, and it's sharp, and it anyway, I like it. I like the fact that you can change the ND filters, like specifically N3 through 2.5 by 1 degrees instead of like, N3, N9, 1.5, 2.1 or something.
Yep. They've got that variable ND in there that actually even goes down into their consumer cameras too. I mean, I've got that in FS5, the variable ND. It's awesome.
Yeah. So I love that. And then lens-wise, we went with Panavision Primos. We went with the Primo lightweight zooms, which we referred to as 1, 2, and 3. And then we had a long zoom. We had an 11-1 in case we needed to lens in a little bit more. We also ran with a couple of slant focus lenses to give us some of the effects. So we had a 25 and a 50 slant focus lens, which we used for some effects.
Now, what does that do, the slant focus?
So the slant focus is, it's like a tilt shift lens. So you can take your focus plane and you can shift it. Usually your focus plane is like flat to your sensor, and so you take it flat to the sensor and then you twist it, right, so that you could cut focus through my eye and then come out the back of my head. This eye's out of focus, this one's in focus, kind of a deal.
Yeah
So we did that several times for some of our looks. And what else did we have? Anyway, we did a little bit of lens baby, but not too much lens baby, and then filtration.
I'm glad you mentioned that because in the second part, Death Valley, which is shot in both black and white and color for different time periods. And did you use the same camera package for the whole series?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a scene when we first meet Amelia Earhart, and it's a little bit of like this kind of defocusy thing going on in the corner. And I thought to myself, I'm like, is that a lens baby? And I'm curious if it was.
So no. But I see why you would get that.
What was that?
What we did, so that was the day that everybody COVID traced out, contact traced out. So that was Penny Sprague operating that. But what that was I think we just had our number one zoom, which is the like 15-40, and it was just a diopter.
Yeah.
So in terms of the diopter, you get that shallower focus, which we were going for, which is like, because we run a fairly wide lens, and so if you're on a wide lens, it's hard to take your depth of field and like crush it. So we put
Yeah.
I think a number one diopter on, and I was so happy to see that shot make the final cut because we focused on the scars on her back, the little
Yes.
tattoo things, and we stayed there for that entire shot until Ike kneels down into the shot, which I just love that kind of stuff. So, you know, we track across on a slider, and it's all about those scars. And we see this group coming up, and the natural thing is, as soon as you see the group, oh, rack to the group, right? But we
Yeah.
didn't do it because it was all about Amelia, and we just stayed there until he dropped down in the frame, which I was just super happy about. So
I
anyway,
love that too.
effect
You
was
almost did
diopter.
you almost did the reverse. You like didn't focus on them at all. In fact, you made that corner even blurrier. So
Yeah,
I really
yeah,
like that.
It's you know, the diopter's got a little bit of shape to it, so the corners really go.
Yeah.
They stretch and blur. So we used, I mean, even in some of our effects, we would do slant focus lens to control focus, and then sometimes we would throw in a split diopter, and that would give us like a double reflection of somebody's face when somebody was going through like some either results of the pill or fear or something like that. So we were trying all kinds of stuff to make it. Somebody called it the weird, or get the weird lens, or get the, anyway, there was some name that was pretty fun. So yeah,
It must be fun too with American Horror Story because you can really go wild. Like
yeah,
there's no boundaries there. It's certainly rooted in reality of some sort. Like there's a groundedness to it, but you can go way out there in the story and the cinematography and the lighting. It's got to be a lot of fun.
yeah. I mean, for my first show, to do this show, to have 3-4 looks and to be able to do whatever I wanted. I mean, can you imagine the difference between that and like getting some rom-com, you know,
Yeah.
where everybody just needs to look beautiful? So yeah, it's a total privilege for me.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about the second part of this, Death
Yeah.
Valley. It's a whole new story. It's 4 episodes, and it opens with an entire black and white. Well, not entire, but it opens with a black and white,
Yeah.
which you find out is representative of a certain time period, and then there's some color for present day later on. So talk to me about the choice to shoot black and white, what it means, and also the camera decision for that. Because it sounds like you're using the same camera versus using like an actual, you know, what is the sensor? Somebody has a black and white sensor. I can't think.
So
Is it red?
Red has
Red's
a
got the black and
sensor.
white. Okay.
I think they use that on Mank. So we did a lot of research with that in terms of the black and white and how big of a deal we need to make of it, because obviously your wardrobe has to have specific parameters, because if you put like a green and an orange together, they're both going to go gray, about the same gray.
Okay.
So if you shoot with, I mean, we decided to go color sensor because we had it, for one, and two, let's say you had an orange and a gray in your scene. If you're still shooting in color with a black and white LUT, you can grab that green and you can make it darker, or you can grab the orange and make it darker or brighter. You still have that control. But if you shoot in clear black and white, there's no more adjusting. You can adjust your contrast and stuff like that. But with us, like, we had a green slime that we were using, and you could take that green slime and you can make it white or you can make it black, because you just grab that color channel and you take the luminance up or down. So my preference, if I'm going to ever shoot black and white again, which I'd love to do because it's fantastic, is to shoot it color with a black and white LUT, because you still have control over the color.
That's interesting. I never thought about that, but you're right. If you don't have color on the ingest, there's nothing to attach onto in post,
Right.
or I guess very little. I don't know. A colorist may have a different opinion of that, but but that's an interesting. So for things that you knew you needed to explore more in post, were you purposely like amplifying that color? Like if you knew someone's, like the slime, if you knew that you wanted some flexibility with the slime, were you sort of like exaggerating the green in it so that you had room in post?
I mean, for the slime and stuff like that, yes. So my office at Fox became the testing ground. So it was located right near costumes. So set design built walls of different colors, and they put it in my office for the different sets, and they would change those out as we moved. And then wardrobe could go in, hang the clothing on the set, take a picture. And you can just do that with your phone, go to Film Noir on your phone and snap a shot, and you'd be like, okay, these colors go, these colors are
Sure.
too flat against each other. So that was kind of our process in terms of color there. I don't know if we ever amplified a particular color. Like in the old days, the sets would be like odd colors, like Addams Family, like it didn't even look normal. But so we took like an approach somewhere in between,
So the second story revolves around aliens. And there's certainly a large portfolio of alien themes in visuals and movies, especially in this time with like the talk about aliens, like in 2020, 2021, like all of a sudden everybody's talking about aliens again. The timing is unique and interesting. And I think there's a lot of attention put on that kind of world right now. So when you're telling an alien story like this, what are your references to kind of make it feel similar, but something new?
Yeah. So the reference that we got from Ryan Murphy was, I can't remember. I can't remember it now.
Was it a movie?
It's Spielberg's movie. Close Encounters. Close Encounters.
Yes.
Close Encounters was his reference, right? And there was a little bit of 2001: Space Odyssey in there.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of I can't remember the other movie. Anyway, Close Encounters was the main reference, right? Which is interesting because that's not black and white.
No, and it's very warm and saturated.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so what were you taking from it then?
I mean, I think we were taking the feel of camera work. Like Ryan wanted to do these push-ins on people's faces when they saw interesting things, and you see that in the opening sequence with like the young boy, like, look, mommy, there's the twisters or whatever, and so I think we took a little bit more of that than the color palette, obviously, because the color palette's black and white. But what a great intro to black and white. The very first abduction, of the young boy and the mother, and it's so kind of like Americana. We start out with her singing, and she's just dancing around doing her meal. And one of my favorite shots is her looking out the window, and Timmy, come in, right? It's just almost this beautiful, like I almost think we're in Italy, with her look. And then all of a sudden it turns, right? And she sees the twisters, and we get a little bit of flashing light, and then off we go on this adventure of mole beams, splashing light in, and movers, giving us spotlights and so forth. And for me, that was the funnest part, was like, letting things blow out, letting things get overexposed, like going to extremes. Again, one of my favorite shots during the abduction is like this little army men shaking on the table in front, and you see her in the background out of focus, like with the wind, like blowing the door open, and she's just barely hanging on. Anyways, quite an adventure. I don't know what you want me to speak about it, or.
Well, you spoke perfectly about it. I mean, I thought it was really interesting that you employed some kind of old school, like 50s, 40s movies techniques in there. Like it has a nostalgic feel. One of which was that kind of like little bit of shaky camera. It's almost like you banged the camera during the autopsy scene, the alien autopsy scene, where the slime like jumps into their face and the camera has like this shake to it, but it's not like handheld shake. It's like a jagged hit almost. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Is that where it jumps out at the very first time?
Yes.
Okay.
The very first autopsy scene, they open up the alien. They see that there's nothing inside, but then there is something inside, this slime that just comes and attacks. But there's almost this, I can't pinpoint the films I'm talking about, but it feels nostalgic in a way, the way that the camera moves in that scene to make you feel scared.
I honestly can't reference that because I missed 2 days of work because I was skateboarding and hurt my back.
Oh,
so
no.
My A camera operator, Mike Vehar, shot that.
That's so funny.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they were hitting the camera or who was operating. Actually, that I'm
That's
pretty sure that
funny.
was the handheld footage inside the surgery room. I have shot there before, but I wasn't there for that particular day.
What
Um,
happened?
right, it's skateboarding, man. The simplest stuff, right?
Oh,
Takes you
you
out.
must
I
have
was
been
so sad.
so mad. You're like,
I
I'm
was bummed.
DPing a series. What
I
am
know.
I doing?
I know. But then
Oh
again,
no.
you have to live a little bit too. So it
That
was
is
like,
true.
anyway, that was
Well, the last thing I want
an
to
odd
talk
injury.
about
Yeah.
is exactly the last, and you're better now, I assume.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to talk about is filters.
Yeah.
As I'm watching it in both, but for some reason I noticed it more in the Death Valley Part 2, in the black and white scenes in particular, is this blooming in the highlights.
Yeah.
And I'd like to talk to you about the filters you used and why and what that did to the visuals.
Okay. So we switched our filters. The first 6 were shot with black promist and quarter black promist as the basic. And then in the Death Valley series, we went to black and white was black frost. Right. And so we had black frost.
Why did you switch them up?
Because of the bloom. We tested for the bloom. We wanted a bright bloom. I wanted to overexpose the whites. I wanted the the latitude of the film to be a little bit tighter. So 6 or 7 stops you hit white, and then on the other end you hit black, and not as much in between. So when you got those whites, you got a little bit of a glow around it, and you see that in Amelia Earhart in the hospital room. You see that during the abduction scenes. We also would add in occasionally a promist, so we'd have a black frost and a regular promist, which I think has a whatever they put in there is not of a dark nature. It's a lighter nature, and it blooms even more. So we'd have some combo packs. We shot with the Mitchell series, which is an older series. And one of the things that I found, which is good to know, is somebody's remaking the Mitchell series, the Mitchell A, B, and C. And I think when you do that, you need to match your old and new. So we had old filters and new filters, and I'm not quite sure that they were completely matching. So just check that out. But anyway, when you're testing, the black frost brought the bloom, which I loved. I love the bloom. Almost like you're shooting with a lens that doesn't have a very good coating, or it's not polished right, and so you get a little bit of an edge, like an aberration or a reflection, or something that wasn't perfect for that time. But that was our formula.
It looks so good, and on the skin too. Like, I love, because the alien abduction, you got to have that big light. You have to have that big spotlight that just blows everything out. And I just like the way that
struggle too.
What was the struggle?
The struggle was getting the right gear, because we wanted mole beams and they weren't available. So we had to struggle with budget and other things. So we ended up like in the abduction in the desert on the car ended up being like a mover, like a theater light that you can control the beam. Yeah, we had other sources that were like open face HMIs, but we couldn't get the beam tight enough. So we ended up going to a mover, full brightness. I bumped the ISO higher than I would want to, and that gave us that look. And then later for like the Wyckoff, the intro, that we got our mole beams, and which is just, they're beautiful for that.
I love stuff like that. It's crazy to hear that there's budget issues on a Ryan Murphy project. It seems like there should never be budget issues on his stuff at this point.
I would like to think that too.
I know. Oh my God. Well, it was really a pleasure talking with you, Andrew. And the show is American Horror Story, double feature. I believe by the time this episode comes out, the entire series is out there, and it's on FX, so you guys can check it out for yourself. But such a great show and really a fun conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben. It's been a pleasure.
All right, I want to thank Andrew Mitchell, Director of Photography for American Horror Story Double Feature, for coming on the show and talking to us all. You guys definitely check out the show. It is awesome. You know who else is awesome? Connor Crosby. He produces the show and makes it so good. You can find him at ignitionvisuals.com and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, as well as your favorite podcast apps so you never miss an episode. All things Go Creative Show at gocreativeshow.com. And of course, if you want to follow me, you can find me on Instagram at Ben Consoli, at Ben Consoli. Thank you all for joining us today, and we will see you next week on another episode of the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers.